The days slipped by quietly after that strange week. The air in the house was still, but underneath it all, Emily could feel something building, like a storm hiding behind clear skies. Her father was spending more time in his study now, typing for hours. His door always closed. She would hear the sound of his fingers on the keyboard and the occasional sigh. He said he was working on a book, but he never mentioned what it was about. Emily tried to stay busy. She helped with chores, cooked dinner, and spent hours scrolling on her phone just to fill the silence. Her mother called every other night from Seattle. Her voice warm but tired. She always asked, "How's your dad doing?" And Emily would answer, "He's fine," even though she knew he wasn't. Her mother never asked anything more, and Emily didn't push it. She didn't want to worry her one afternoon. While cleaning the living room, Emily decided to move the couch to vacuum underneath it. She was reaching down to pull out some dust when she found something unexpected, a small folded piece of paper tucked tightly between the cushions. It looked old, slightly crumpled. She unfolded it, thinking it was just a receipt or note. But when she saw the handwriting, her heart stopped. It was her mother's handwriting, neat and familiar. The letter wasn't addressed to anyone specific, but as Emily began to read, her hand started to tremble. "Daniel deserves the truth, but I can't give it to him yet. The past has already taken too much from us. If he knew what I did, he'd never forgive me. Sometimes I wonder if love is just two people keeping quiet about the same pain." Emily froze. The words hit her like a wave. Her mother, the one who always forgave, who always smiled, had secrets too. She reread the lines, trying to make sense of them. What truth? What past? What had she done? Her mind raced suddenly. Her father's silence, his distant look, the tension between them, it all started to connect. Maybe her mother had done something, and her father had found out. Maybe that was why everything felt wrong. Emily slipped the letter into her pocket and went upstairs. She sat on her bed for a long time, staring at the wall. Her parents had always been her example of love, imperfect but strong. Now she didn't know what to believe. That evening, her father knocked on her door. "Want to go for a walk by the lake?" he asked. She hesitated but agreed. The air outside was warm, the sky painted in soft gold and pink. The path by the lake shimmered with fading sunlight. As they walked, her father started talking, not about his book or work, but about life, about how people change without realizing it. "When your mother and I were younger," he said, "we thought love would always stay the same. But it doesn't. It changes shape. Sometimes it disappears and you don't even notice until it's gone." Emily listened quietly. Her heart hurt. She wanted to ask him if her mother had hurt him, if he still loved her, but she couldn't. She just nodded. And he smiled softly. "You remind me of her," he said. "The way you think, the way you look at things. You both see beauty in everything." For a second, Emily saw something fragile in his eyes, longing mixed with regret. It was the kind of emotion words couldn't fix. They sat by the water for a while. The air smelled like pine and summer rain. Her father threw a small pebble into the lake and watched the ripples spread. "Do you ever wish life could be rewritten?" he asked suddenly, like a story with a better ending. She wanted to tell him that maybe endings weren't supposed to be perfect, but she didn't know if he'd believe it. When they returned home, her father seemed lighter, almost peaceful. He poured himself a drink, thanked her for the walk, and went upstairs. Emily stayed in the living room, staring at the letter still hidden in her pocket. The words echoed in her mind. "If he knew what I did." Later that night, unable to sleep, she went downstairs. The light under her father's study door was still on. She could hear the faint clicking of keys. Then, silence. A drawer opened, and she heard paper rustle. Her curiosity burned stronger than her fear. She stepped closer and peeked through the small gap in the door. Her father was sitting at his desk, reading something. A letter. The same one she had found earlier. Her stomach turned. How did he have another copy? Or had he known all along? His face was unreadable, but a single tear rolled down his cheek before he folded the paper carefully and put it away. Emily stepped back quietly, her heart racing. She didn't understand everything, but she knew this wasn't about just one mistake. It was about years of things left unsaid. The next morning, she couldn't look at him the same. He smiled when he saw her, but there was sadness in his eyes. She tried to smile back, but her throat tightened. Over breakfast, he said, "Your mom's coming home in a few days. Maybe we can all have dinner together. Start fresh." His tone was hopeful. Almost forced, Emily nodded, pretending to be excited. But inside she was full of questions she didn't dare ask. That afternoon, she went for a walk alone. She needed air. The sky was grey, the wind cool against her skin. She kept thinking about the letter, about how fragile her parents' love had become. Maybe her father wasn't the only one who had hurt the other. Maybe they both had. When she came home, she found her father asleep at his desk, the computer still on. She glanced at the screen. It was an open document titled, "The One Who Stayed." The first line read, "Love doesn't end when trust breaks. It ends when forgiveness stops." Emily felt tears welling in her eyes. Maybe this was his story, his way of trying to understand what went wrong. She closed the laptop gently and covered him with a blanket. For the first time, she didn't see him just as her father, but as a man who had once loved deeply and lost his way. That evening, the rain returned, tapping softly against the windows. Emily sat in the dark living room. The letter in her hands, she thought about her mother, about what kind of secret could make her write those words. She didn't want to judge either of them anymore. She just wanted the truth. A part of her wanted to burn the letter, to pretend she had never found it, but another part wanted to hand it to her father and say, "Tell me everything." She didn't do either. She just kept it close, like a piece of evidence from a life she didn't fully understand yet. Over the next 2 days, she watched her father carefully. He was trying, cooking dinner, playing soft music, asking about her plans for next semester. But sometimes she'd catch him staring at his phone or standing at the window. Lost in thought, she wondered if he was waiting for her mother or for something else entirely. On the night before her mother was supposed to return, Emily walked past his study again. The door was open this time. He was sitting there, staring at an old photo of the three of them. His face looked tired, worn out, but there was a calmness in his eyes. He didn't notice her at first, but then he looked up and smiled faintly. "You know," he said, "sometimes love survives not because people forget what happened, but because they choose to remember and forgive anyway." Emily didn't respond. She just nodded. Her chest felt heavy. She knew the next day would bring answers, and maybe more questions. That night, she lay awake thinking about her parents, about how love could look so strong on the outside and still fall apart inside. She thought about the letter again, about her father's quiet confession to the wind by the lake, about the way his voice had cracked when he said her mother's name. And as she drifted to sleep, one thought stayed with her. The truth always finds its way out. What she didn't know was that by the time her mother returned the next day, her father would finally tell her the story he had kept buried for years. A story that would make Emily see both of them not as perfect parents, but as people who had loved, hurt, and forgiven more than she could ever imagine. The storm she had felt brewing in the silence was finally coming, and this time it wouldn't be quiet. Emily never forgot the summer when everything inside her home started to feel strange. It was the year her mother left for a 3-week work trip to Seattle, leaving her alone with her father, Daniel, in their quiet suburban house in Oregon. From the outside, their family looked perfect. A nurse mother who cared for everyone, a father who wrote books from home, and a daughter studying psychology in college. But inside that house, something invisible had changed. It began with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that feels heavy and watchful. The night before her mother left, Emily heard low voices coming from the kitchen. It wasn't loud, but the tension was sharp. Her mother's voice trembled, and her father's sounded tired, not angry, just done. Then came the silence, long and painful, when Emily peeked down the stairs. She saw her mother wiping her eyes while her father stood by the window, his arms crossed, staring out at the rain. The next morning, her mother smiled as if nothing had happened. "Take care of your dad, okay?" she said softly. She kissed Emily's forehead and left. Her father stood at the door, watching the car disappear down the road. Not saying a word, Emily didn't know why. But something about that moment felt final. The first few days were calm. Her father cooked dinner, asked about her classes, and even made her laugh. He told stories about when he was young, how he met her mother, how they used to drive down to the coast just to watch the ocean. His voice was warm, but behind that warmth, Emily sensed a loneliness. She noticed the way he lingered by the window every night, the way he poured himself an extra glass of wine, the way he smiled when he didn't need to. Daniel was a writer who used to fill the house with energy and stories. But now his office door was almost always closed. Sometimes she'd walk past and hear the sound of typing, steady, desperate, like someone trying to rewrite the past. One afternoon she asked what he was working on, and he just said, "A story about choices," then changed the subject. Emily tried to keep busy. She cleaned the house, watched old movies, and called her mother every evening. Her mother sounded tired but cheerful, asking about the garden and the cat, never about Daniel. And Emily never mentioned how strange things felt, how quiet her father had become when her mother's name came up. One evening, the rain began to fall hard. Daniel knocked on her door and asked if she wanted to eat together. He had cooked pasta, the smell of garlic filling the house. They sat down, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. He talked about her college life, asked if she was dating anyone. Emily laughed awkwardly, saying she was too busy with studies. Daniel smiled. "That's good," he said. "People your age rush into things." Then, almost to himself, he added, "Your mother and I did too." There was something about the way he said it that made her chest tighten. She didn't know how to respond, so she stayed quiet. The rain kept falling, and the sound filled the silence between them. Later that night, she walked into the living room to turn off the lights and saw her father asleep on the couch, an old photo album open beside him. The picture showed her parents young and happy, holding baby Emily between them. Her mother's eyes were bright, her father's arm around her. Emily stared at that picture for a long time, wondering where that happiness had gone. Days passed quickly after that, but the unease didn't fade. One morning, she found her father sitting outside with a cup of coffee, staring at the empty street. "You know," he said quietly, "when you're young, you think love is all about passion. You don't realize it's really about patience." Emily wasn't sure what he meant, but his voice sounded sad, like he was talking to himself, not her. As the days went on, Emily started noticing small details she had never paid attention to before. The way her father's phone would light up late at night, the way he'd quickly turn it face down, The way he'd stare at old letters on his desk, his expression distant. The way her mother's framed photo had been moved from the hallway to his study. One afternoon, she walked into the kitchen and found him holding an envelope. He looked startled when she entered, quickly slipping it into a drawer. "Just some old papers," he said with a faint smile. But his hands were shaking slightly. Something inside Emily began to twist. She didn't want to think badly of her father, but her instincts whispered that there were truths in that house no one had told her. That evening, she stood outside his study door. The light was on, and she could hear him talking softly on the phone. His tone was gentle, almost tender. "No, Claire doesn't know," he said, then paused. "She doesn't need to." Emily's breath caught. He wasn't talking to her mother. He was talking about her. She stepped back quietly, her heart racing. She didn't want to hear more. Didn't want to imagine what that meant. But once doubt enters the heart, it never really leaves. The next morning, Daniel acted normal, made breakfast. Asked if she wanted to go for a drive. Emily agreed. Wanting to pretend everything was fine, they drove out to the old lake where they used to go when she was little. The water shimmered under the sunlight, ducks floating peacefully near the shore. Her father stood beside her and said, "This place reminds me of better times." Emily looked at him, at the faint lines on his face, the tired eyes, and realized he wasn't just her father. He was a man, someone with regrets, secrets, and loneliness too deep to hide. For a moment, she wanted to ask him everything, to tell him she had heard his phone call. But when she saw the sadness in his eyes, she couldn't. On the way back, he turned on the radio. Soft music filling the car, neither of them spoke. But something unspoken passed between them. An awareness that they were both holding on to things they didn't understand. That night, as she lay in bed, Emily thought about her parents, about love, and how easily it could become something fragile. Her mother's kind voice over the phone, her father's distant eyes. Two sides of the same story she was just beginning to see. The rain returned that evening, tapping gently against the windows. The house felt colder than before. She walked into the hallway, stared at the family photo hanging on the wall, and whispered to herself, "Something's not right." Her reflection in the glass stared back, calm but uncertain. The laughter that once filled their home was gone, replaced by careful conversations and long silences. She didn't know what her father was hiding, or why her mother had left looking so sad. But one thing was clear. The truth was somewhere between them, waiting for the right moment to break through the quiet walls of that house. And as she turned off the lights and went back to her room, she had no idea that what she would soon discover would change the way she saw love, family, and forgiveness forever. The silence in the house wasn't just emptiness anymore. It was the sound of something coming. Something she wasn't ready for, but could already feel in her bones. The morning her mother was supposed to come home, the whole house felt different. The air was heavy, and even the sound of the clock ticking seemed louder than usual. Emily woke up early, unable to sleep. Her heart was restless. She knew something was coming, though she didn't know what. When she went downstairs, she found her father sitting at the kitchen table, a half-empty cup of coffee in front of him. His eyes were tired, his face pale. He looked like someone who hadn't slept all night. "Morning," he said softly. His voice was calm, but there was something fragile about it. Emily poured herself some coffee and sat across from him. The silence between them stretched long until he finally spoke. "Your mum's flight lands this evening," he said, "before she comes home. There's something I need to tell you." Her chest tightened. She could tell by his tone that this wasn't going to be small. He took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the table. "You're old enough to understand now," he said slowly. When you were little, your mother and I. We weren't perfect. I made mistakes, ones that hurt her deeply. Emily said nothing. She waited, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I thought she didn't love me anymore, he continued. I felt lonely, angry and foolish. I met someone. It wasn't serious. It wasn't love. But it was wrong. His voice broke slightly. Your mother found out, and she left for a while. That she came back because of you. Because she wanted us to stay a family. Emily stared at him. Her throat went dry. The world felt blurry. He looked up at her with eyes full of regret. I've lived with that guilt for years, he said. I tried to make things right, to be a better man. But some things don't fade easily. She swallowed hard, trying to process everything. So, the arguments, the silence. It was because of that. He nodded. Yes, he said. But that's not the whole story. Her heart pounded. She didn't want to hear more, but also couldn't stop. He continued. Your mother never told me everything either. I think she forgave me too easily because she had her own secrets. I found a letter a while ago, the same one you probably found. Emily froze. He knew. I didn't mean to hide it from you, he said gently. I just didn't want you to see us as broken. I wanted you to remember us as a family. She looked at him, eyes wide. What did she mean in the letter? She asked, what truth? He sighed. Before you were born, she loved someone else, someone she almost married. She ended things to be with me, but he came back years later, right before you turned 6. His voice dropped lower. I don't think she did anything wrong, but I think she was tempted to, and when I found that letter, it made me realize we both failed each other. Emily felt her stomach twist. So you both, she began, but couldn't finish. He shook his head. No, Emily, he said quickly. It's not what you think. Love isn't always clean. Sometimes two people hurt each other because they're afraid to lose what they already have. The room went quiet again. The morning light coming through the window painted soft shadows across the floor. Emily didn't know what to say, her parents. The people she thought she knew completely were strangers in that moment after a long silence. Daniel stood up and walked to the window. I kept writing, he said. It was the only way I could talk about it. I turned our pain into stories because I didn't know how else to live with it. He turned to face her, his eyes red. I wasn't a good husband, but I tried to be a good father. I hope you know that. Emily's chest ached. She stood up slowly and walked over to him. I know, she said quietly. I see that now. He smiled faintly, a sad, grateful smile. Your mother is stronger than both of us, he said. She loved through everything. And that's something I'll never forget. The day passed slowly. Emily couldn't focus on anything. Every sound in the house made her jump. Her father moved quietly, cleaning up, setting the table, as if preparing not just for dinner but for forgiveness. As evening came, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway made both of them stop. Her heart raced. She hadn't seen her mother in weeks. And now everything felt different. When Claire walked in, she looked tired but calm. She dropped her bag and smiled when she saw them. I missed you both, she said softly. Emily ran to hug her, and for a moment, everything felt right again. Daniel stood a few steps away, watching, unsure what to do. Then Claire looked at him, and something unspoken passed between them. Not anger, not resentment, something softer, like peace. They sat together at dinner. The air was tense at first, but Claire broke the silence. How was everything here? She asked. Daniel smiled weakly. Quiet, he said. But good. Emily noticed the way her mother's eyes softened when he spoke. After dinner, Claire went upstairs to unpack. Emily followed her. She wanted to ask about the letter, about the truth. But when she saw her mother sitting on the edge of the bed, holding an old photograph, she stopped. Claire looked up. "You found it, didn't you?" she said gently. Emily hesitated, then nodded. Her mother smiled sadly. "That letter wasn't about what you think. It wasn't about betrayal. It was about guilt." Emily frowned. "Guilt?" Claire sighed. "When your father hurt me, I was angry. I thought about leaving. I thought about someone who once made me feel alive. But I didn't do anything. Still, I felt guilty for even remembering him. That's what that letter was about. I didn't want to tell your father because he had already suffered enough from his own mistake." Tears filled Emily's eyes. Everything finally made sense. Her parents had both been lost in their own pain, each trying to protect the other from more hurt. Claire looked at her daughter. "Love isn't about never breaking, Emily," she said softly. "It's about what you choose to do after it breaks." Downstairs, Daniel was sitting on the couch, waiting, when Claire came down. She walked straight to him. No words, just silence. She sat beside him and took his hand. He looked at her with tired eyes. "I told her," he said quietly. Claire nodded. "I know," she whispered. For a long time, none of them spoke. The house, once filled with tension and silence, now felt different. Still quiet but peaceful. Later that night, as rain began to fall outside, Emily sat by the window, watching her parents together on the couch. They weren't holding hands, but their closeness spoke louder than words. She thought about everything she had learned, about secrets, forgiveness, and how love wasn't always about perfection. It was about trying again, choosing to stay even when it was easier to leave. For the first time in years, Emily felt calm. The silence that had once haunted the house now felt warm, healing. Her father looked up and met her eyes from across the room. He smiled, not the forced, polite smile he used to give, but a real one full of gratitude, and in that moment, Emily understood something she hadn't before. Love was never a straight story. It was a messy one, full of mistakes, pain, and forgiveness. It wasn't about who was right or wrong. It was about two people who refused to let go. That night, as the sound of rain echoed softly against the windows, Emily whispered to herself, "They made it." The house that once held so many secrets now held something else. Peace. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of forgiveness, full of love that had survived everything. And as the night deepened, Emily realized the truth her parents had learned long before her. That real love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to endure.